older black men, and I have an uncle who is a big Bass Reeves fan, and he reads the literature and he loves westerns. So he was always in the zeitgeist of my family conversations, largely because of Uncle Kenny. And then the audition came through a request for the audition for a self-tape. And I said, oh, yeah, I just saw this on Deadline, and I'm really happy for David. And I'm like, oh, Jenny Reeves, okay. And I read the sides, and I was like really blown away. And then when I got to read the full script, I was even more blown away. But Bass Reeves came to me by way of this project, but also just the cultural phenomenon that he and his family were.
So wonderful. Now, as is often the story, there's this hero, Bass Reeves, who the show revolves around, but such an important part of Bass's story is Jenny, is the relationship, is how that evolves throughout the season as well. I'd love to just hear some of your thoughts about how Jenny and Bass relate to one another, what your journey was as an actor, just getting into the story. I'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. Well, I would say it started very early with the dialect, just getting that Texas dialect, because Bass and Jenny are in Texas. They're in Texarkana, but she, has a Texas dialect, and I'm from North Carolina, and people think, oh, Southern dialect, she got it, and it's actually harder when you already have a Southern dialect to find the nuances of the transition. But I found that in her, and where her voice sat. I think I was informed by the fact that we see her in the show as a mother of 4, but she and Bass ultimately had 10 children. So that kind of rootedness and groundedness of her informed that deeper, like, timbre of her voice for me. A lot of the transformation for Jenny came again from my imagination. There's like 2 pictures of her, period, and I didn't even know that Bass had a wife, you know what I mean? So there's very little information, but then came the physical and ultimately endowing that prosthetic that I wear for almost, it felt like the whole 6 months we were in Texas, with the same kind of relationship that a mother would have to a child, because I've not experienced that, but I could, get to know that. And so you have a kind of psychophysical, dive into that woman and her legacy and the women that she represents, I think globally, but in particularly in that time in Reconstruction of people newly emancipated, using their imagination to decide, A, what freedom means, and then B, what will they do with it.
I love that. I want to just dig in on that moment of time as well, that period of history. But just quickly, I know this is a SAG screening, but by show of hands, how many people in here are actors? Yeah.
Yeah, we're in good company.
Okay, now I'm scared.
And so I want to dig into this period of time because I find it fascinating. The end of the Civil War, Reconstruction, is a really powerful moment, which was so deeply felt when you realized that it wasn't clear to so many people who had been formerly enslaved that the war was even over, that the Union had won. So I wonder, for yourselves, and just I think from the actor's point of view, I find research fascinating. I wonder, David, starting with you, of course the story had been with you for a while, but when it came to actually shooting, when it came to taking apart the scripts, when it came to doing your research, what were the things that were helpful? What did you dig into when you first got back to this point now you're about to shoot?
Yeah, as you say, it's an incredibly rich period of time, along with not fully understanding why Bass Reeves is not more well known. I can't understand why the Reconstruction period is not mined more for story. Well, I think we do know why. It's not more mined. It was an incredible time in this country's history. It was post the Civil War and before Jim Crow, and it was a time where Black people were given incredible autonomy coming out of the Civil War and the end of slavery. But it's also, the way I always felt about it and reading the history of it is, to me, it's sort of the red hot eye of this experiment that is America. You know, coming out of hundreds of years of slavery, what does this country now want to be? And Bass, to me, in my research, represents what is possible. And also, unfortunately, why Jim Crow was slapped upon the country in order to deter people like Bass Reeves and Jenny, and what you see through this show, which is people who are not only given freedom and empowerment, but are allowed to thrive within their family, you know. And that was one of the things that we were very keen to show in the show, was to see this family functioning in a way that isn't what we often see in this period, which is brutality and rape and brokenness and subjugation and you know, all of those things that of course are present, but it is a moment where this country was aiming at something better, and the resistance to that was very, very real. And to your question earlier, one of the things we really wanted to focus on in the development phase as it pertains to Bass and Jenny is we wanted not to make a Western. I was actually keen on making an anti-Western. And what I mean by that is a show that people who don't care for Westerns would love, even though it is. And of course, for people who do like Westerns, you will take care of you as well. And the way we did that is to center it around the family. Everyone can relate to a greater or lesser degree around what it is to be within a family, to aspire to want to be within a family. Certainly the work-life balance being a really tricky thing that for all of us. I heard all the women slightly squeal when they heard the 10 kids. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Maybe you can't relate to that bit. But you know, the fact that they are constantly, as you'll see if you keep watching the show, they are going to be, the pressure is, yes, the racial stuff, yes, the political stuff, the cultural stuff, but it's the familial stuff that speaks to everyone. And we wanted to find what that was, and constantly trying to get back to your family, back to your kids, was the thing that we kind of decided to center the drama around. So the politics, the history, all of that is great, but that does not a great show make. I think you really, really want to find an entry point for anyone and everyone who they get fed the history and all that happened through the lens of the relatability of a family.
I try to drill down on, I really do hope you guys continue to watch. It's such an incredible show. There's a moment, without giving too much away, but there's a moment in episode 4. I think this goes towards a question, David, for you as far as being producer and actor. But there's a moment in episode 4 where, you know, we're so used to these shows, especially in the Western sense, where the hero's going off and being a hero and he's doing his thing. But in that heroic moment, towards the end of episode 4, we are brought back to Jenny, brought back to her role in his life, and it's such a poignant part of the show, and it, like you say, it runs through. How much were you able to sort of shape the narrative as you were getting drafts through from Chad? How much were you able to say, let's make sure we keep the North Star, let's make sure we focus this way? Was that something that you wanted to do as a producer, or did you allow it to take its course?
Yeah, it's something I did do, it's something I wanted to do, it's something that I felt was imperative to do. You know, I was very aware of the projections of Black life through cinema, through television, especially in a historical context. Like I said before, so much of it is going through a lens of pain, brokenness, and being on the periphery. If we are going to tell this story, it was very important to me to see what I see so often in life, which is functioning Black families, that despite the challenges they're facing, there is love, there is responsibility, there is great parenting, there is of course conflict, but those things had to have existed to have 10 kids. And it was very important for me personally to have that imagery because we seldom do. And so, you know, and thankfully Chad Feehan, our showrunner, also a creator, he's also a family man. And so both of us within our industry understand the pressures of being away from home and all that brings to a relationship, and how intentional you have to be to keep a functional family life going. And so to have that in a show like this was just incredibly important in and amongst everything else that was going on.
And so for you, Lauren, being able to work opposite David in this show, how aware were you of the fact that he was, you know, scene partner and somewhat boss, in a weird way? What was that like for you, just in a sense of your career so far, and how it might have been different?
Well, I was tremendously aware. I mean, when I saw, like I said, when I got the job, when I had the meeting before with David, I knew, first and foremost, what I saw on the page in Jenny, I knew it required a really strong partner for him. And his work in Selma is Martin Luther King. I looked to that. I think I was a student, and I looked to it.
You can say you were a kid.
It was only 8 years ago.
Yeah, she was 12, you guys. She was 12.
I was a student. And I said, oh man, like that's exactly what I want to do. Tell stories that I believe in, with people that I believe in. To tell stories that have that kind of significance, cultural relevance and significance, and forward movement, while also looking back, Sankofa, you know what I mean, like of the thing. And so again, then to be next to him, and he said, I believe in you. I think you can be next to me and make this happen, meant a lot. And David's leadership on and off the screen is wonderful. I mean, I've learned so much about being a leader in this industry, in this skin. And then when we got on screen, and that grounded my confidence. So then we got to set, you know, Jenny, there is no boss higher than Jenny, I'm just saying.
I was just about to say, and that is so true.
So when we were in character, it was all good, you know what I mean? And we could just tell the truth and stand and be, you know, be humans being in front of each other, and it was awesome.
So wonderful. I buried the lead slightly in that David is also a friend of mine for 20 years. And so I want to ask this question, but mate, you made a mistake by asking an actor to do this, because I've come with props and everything.
Oh my Lord, what are we doing?
So, a conversation that David and I have had over the years many times is about, we love talking about film, about stories endlessly. And we have often used the term of where the camera is pointed, about the importance of how a story is told. It's as important as the story itself. And where the camera is focused, if you just shift it just a degree that way or that way, you get an entirely different story. Something I'd like to ask you both about, and I've got my prop to do it, is about the way that the story starts and how we talk about how the show looks at Native American populations. You know, you said yourself, there are so many things, David, that this show covers, but it's so incredible that the show starts in that space with you, with Bass, and that was obviously a part of history. But I wanted to read you just a very tiny paragraph from Sidney Poitier's book, The Measure of a Man. Has anyone not read this, I'll ask? The Measure of a Man. Okay.
Go get it today.
So it's a really small paragraph, but I remembered, when you asked me to do this, David, I remembered it, thinking about the show. He's talking about Hollywood, basically, and about the way that the industry at that point had been telling stories. And he says, if we examine our own history, we see quite clearly how long it took before there was any acknowledgement of the iniquities in our society. Through most of the history of film, we were making movies, for Christ's sake, where the Indians were all bad guys. Now, I want to ask you both about that aspect of the